Hi, everybody. Thank you for everything that has happened up until now. And we are entering into our interfaith segment, in which I'm going to be having a lovely chat for the next 22 minutes with Dharmacharya Seven. So if we can have him highlighted, thank you so much, Phil. So Seven is coming to us today from Los Angeles. He is a teacher in the Buddhist tradition, and he has studied himself just about everywhere: Berkeley and UCLA, Yale, Oxford, and also studying spirituality in Southeast Asia and in India. Welcome, Seven.
Thank you. Welcome.
It's so wonderful to have you. We had a little chat yesterday. It's always fun whenever I get to do a free chat and feel like before I introduce these people to you, I already know how cool they are. So that makes me lucky. So just give us a little bit of your fascinating background, Seven, that you're a Native American person raised by Buddhists. Tell us about your formative years.
Well, if only I had been fortunate enough to be raised by Buddhists. Actually, I was born into a Native American family with roots in this area in Los Angeles, and raised in sort of a Christian environment.
Sorry, I misheard you yesterday.
With very liberal mother and a very good example of a father who made it easy for me to think, this is not the tradition that I'm finding answers. And in so doing, I was able to explore. And I think it first happened that in the Los Angeles area, it was easy to find yoga. And by finding yoga, to find the Eastern traditions and go to college and ask the questions of my political and religious studies professors. There's a material world, but there's a spiritual world. And to find out that these questions have been asked for a long time, had been explored very deeply, and that there were many traditions. And I pointed it out to my mother. I said, did you realize there are other religions? And she's like, well, they just call Jesus by different names in different traditions. And I corrected her and I said, no, there are other spiritual beings. Have you ever heard of the Buddha? And she goes, that's just what the Chinese are calling Jesus. And I pointed out to her that she had a Guanyin statue. And she goes, oh, that's the Virgin Mary. And I said, well, Mother, either you've known it all along or you've accepted it without even realizing it, that the commonalities were so great that it was possible to find it on your own, Mother, and continue it and pass it on to me. Then studying in college, going to Berkeley, I had the opportunity to go to Oxford. Then at Oxford, people talked about India, and I thought, it seems not so far from here, from Europe. It just seems so close by, and I thought I must get there. But I had to go to graduate school, and then I got the scholarship sort of angle. And I can honestly say to the world that if you had the opportunity to practice on the one hand, or on the other hand, study, you should practice, pursue the practice, far more important. But I had a mind that needed to know, that needed answers, that wasn't going to accept anything on blind faith. And, very famously in Buddhism, there's the Kalama Sutra. The Kalama Sutra asks for a spirit of inquiry, free inquiry, that any question, no question is off limits. If you ask, what is the origin of God? That question is verboten. And we're told, let's not ask that. Let's not offend the Lord. But in Buddhism, you could ask this question and you could get answers, and answers that made sense. So for me, going to then graduate school at UCLA, I was able to pursue the scholarship with actual scholars and see it from both ends, not just as a reader, but the producer of sort of the knowledge base that we have. So
I love that. And I relate also to India's not so far. I was going to China some years ago and looked at a map, and it's like, well, there's Tibet and there's Nepal and there's India. That's nothing, when indeed that's more or less everything. So I just want to let everybody know that Seven is wearing a mask because to get good Wi-Fi reception, he had to go to a place where the mask is required. So what led you then to vegetarianism and veganism?
It's interesting because as a young boy, I was in a band, and one of the members said, "I'm going to become a vegetarian." I said, "That's ridiculous." But I said, "Since you're doing it, I'll do it too, just to prove how ridiculous it is." And a week later, he gave up, and I never gave up. So I was, all of my adult life, have been a vegetarian. And it wasn't enough, I quickly discovered, to be a vegetarian. So taking out more things from my diet, then I became a vegan, and I thought, wow, sort of like a shark needs to keep moving to swim and to thrive. And I found the more things I left out, the more labels I read, the more ingredients that I realized were animal products, I became healthier. And I was always very connected, as is native tradition, with nature. So in nature, you see there all the plants that can heal us, all the forest that sustains us. And by doing so, by carrying on in the tradition, the native tradition, because people ask me oftentimes, doesn't native spirituality, it's really just Catholicism. And I said, that's the imposed religion. Spanish is the imposed language. The native tongues, which were illegal to speak in this country till about 1972. So people always say, why don't you just revive the traditions? It's not so easy. It's not a matter of people didn't want to hold on to this knowledge. And the same with Buddhism. There's a divide between the Sanskrit world and the Pali world. But it's almost a silly distinction, because Pali is to Sanskrit what Spanish is to Latin. They're rooted in the same Indo-European sort of family of languages. And Pali was the language spoken by the people. So if the Buddha had wanted to be a scholar and only speak to Brahmins, then that's what he would have done. But he was not born into a Brahmin caste where it would have been readily available. The Buddha had an excellent education, what we could think of as a college education, tutored at home in the British manner, because he was being groomed to be the ruler of the area where he lived, which was actually in Central Asia, near India. He moved to India, as I think all young men at some point get an urge in them. I want to head east to find wisdom. And as I myself wanted to leave the West to find the wisdom of the East, when you get there, you realize you could stand in the place where you are. It's possible anywhere to do this. But for some of us, we need the visceral experience. We need to enter the jungle. We need to practice in a monastic fashion. And I don't know what I had in me that led me so strongly, that pulled me in that direction. But by doing so, I had the firsthand experience that I could come back and say, oh, this is what is actually believed. This is, if you ask the actual practitioners, what they practice, not limiting in to books. At UCLA, I had a professor, and he wrote a book about Zen. And he said, Zen is thoroughly misunderstood in the West as if they're anti-scholarship and do nothing. When in fact, having done the scholarship, they leave that behind and then they enter practice. So it's no longer a discussion and a debate, but an actual practice. And his name was Professor Buswell. He then explained that he, in his own search, he started in Korea. He practiced in the Mahayana, the Zen tradition, and then went to a Theravada country and ordained and practiced in that tradition, then came back to the West, became a professor at UCLA. And I said, wait, you could do all those things and carry on a normal life? And, it's the spirit of exploration that I think leads one to have to see firsthand, what will I do with my life? Where will I find meaning? And interestingly, the Buddha was more a shaman than a priest, right? About the direct personal experience of these things, of the truth. It's not that he read it somewhere. It's not that it's a continuation of Hinduism. It's not that he was immersed in the Vedas and simply repeating that Vedic knowledge. He went beyond that and he said, There's a direct knowledge, a direct way of seeing. And this was very much aligned with Native American tradition, that everybody is called to have an experience where they go out and see for themselves.
And that was one of the interesting things that you were talking about in our previous conversation, that the Native American tradition, as we all know, has a great connection to nature. But what a lot of people don't know is that there is a forest tradition within Buddhism, which happens to be your tradition.
Yes,
so fill us in on that.
Well, the forest tradition, generally credited to Thailand, where they thought, we've come a long way and we've come to where there are monks in monasteries, simply practicing or studying. But the Buddha talked about a monastic tradition based in the forest. He emerged from the forest. He himself lived in the forest his whole life. Later on, as monasteries were donated, they were not monasteries in the way we envisioned them, in the Roman style, but rather there was one place called Bamboo Grove in Rajgir, India. And the Bamboo Grove was a place where people would go see the Buddha. And they asked him, you could live in a palace. And he goes, I've left that all behind. So Buddhism is about avoiding extremes. So the extreme of hedonistic indulgence, living as a prince, the extreme of asceticism, as if doing penance were going to solve all our problems. So the Thai forest tradition established, we need to get back to basics. And the basics of this tradition are not, let us simply meditate for the sake of samadhi, for the sake of calm, but mindfulness and insight. And the insight practice is really what made, or what caught on and made this Thai forest tradition, not only in Thailand, but then spreading to Sri Lanka, to Burma, to go back, you could say, back to nature. It's no accident that the Buddha became enlightened under a tree. The reason he did that is he was born under a tree. He chose consciously to pass away under two trees, two sal trees. And every Buddha previously, he told us, had their own kind of enlightenment tree, different species of tree. It wasn't always the Bo tree or Ficus religiosa, but it was a tree specifically chosen as if the earth is giving us her energy, as if the trees are in partnership with us. I always want to mention, because this is an extraordinary thing that I found, the worst thing about Asia, the worst thing about living in the forest, in the jungle, to me, are the mosquitoes. But as somebody discovered, the mosquitoes seem to have a consciousness or an alignment with the trees and with the forest. So when they sense your peace and your purpose of being there, they don't bother you. When they sense a bad purpose, they don't leave you alone. So when I would travel in Asia, I would think, oh, this would be perfect if there just weren't these mosquitoes. When I calm down, they calm down. When I approached the forest in a certain way, the forest approached me in a certain way. And I thought, this is the essence of native knowledge, the native wisdom, that you could almost think of it in a pantheistic way, that the mountains are alive, the trees are alive, the rivers are alive. All these things are sensed. And the deeper you meditate, the more you become in tune with it. You sense that energy, and you sense the assistance of a tree. When we sit in meditation, at least formal sitting meditation, we hold up our back, and sort of there's an upsurge of yogic pranic energy that holds us up. It seems to come from the roots of the tree to help us. And people said, well, you don't really believe that the tree is aware of you. Well, there was an Indian scientist whose last name is Bose, B-O-S-E, who proved that plants are aware, that plants have some semblance, something that we could call consciousness. They may not be thinking in abstract ways, and they might. I'm not saying they're not. The sensitivity that the Native American tradition promotes is exactly, in this sense, the Buddhist tradition. And it's very interesting that when the Dalai Lama first came to this country, he came to the Southwest and he met with the Native Americans there, and they immediately recognized one another by the turquoise jewelry, by the styles. When I went to Ladakh, India, I saw Native American photographs. And I thought, what are these doing here? And they're like, these aren't Native American photographs. These are Tibetan people. But they had the same braided hair, the same woven styles. And I said, no, somebody's playing a joke. And then you look more closely and you could see tiny differences. But they had bison there in Tibet, just as we had here in the Plains states. Mm-hmm. And the extraordinary similarities, it turned out, were no accident, because Edward P. Vining wrote about it in 1885. And Rick Fields wrote about it in our lifetime in a book called How the Swans Came to the Lake. It's a narrative history of Buddhism in the United States or in the Americas, that those people visited here. So the book Vining wrote was called An Inglorious Columbus. It wasn't Columbus who discovered it. It wasn't Christianity. It wasn't Catholicism that first came to this country. Buddhism was here beforehand. So it's not just that there are extraordinary similarities because all religions are the same. No, they were actually here. It's documented in Chinese written accounts, and we have a lot of archaeological evidence. Vining goes, it's a more than a 500-page book, so that these things are talked about. For me, being from here, feeling connected to the land here in the Los Angeles area, particularly the Pasadena area, I thought it's all always made sense. We've confounded the picture. We've believed the story of a sort of imperial rule. Oh, this is a new land. No one was here, and we're going to start fresh. And it was never that way. And if we seek our own spiritual evolution, we think, oh, I'm going to start fresh. No one's ever done this before. But we find, oh, it has been done before. There is a path. It's established. And Buddha's really, their purpose is to point the way. There's a famous saying, we ourselves, by ourselves is evil done. By ourselves is evil left undone. We ourselves make this choice. No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. Buddhas merely point the way. It tells us that the responsibility is ours, and we have a lot of help from nature in doing it.
Beautiful. So you follow the Theravada path, and we've had Buddhists speak with us before, and one of the things that was explained is that very often in the Theravada path, even though we think of Buddhism as being vegetarian and full of ahimsa, that a lot of Theravada Buddhists say, oh no, it's okay to eat meat because the Buddha said so. And you have somewhat of a different take on that. So right. Please explain.
The Buddha didn't really say so. What he said was that for monastics, there is the responsibility for getting food is from the donors. So what the donors offer, you may eat. And there's no, I think we would all agree that if you were starving, if you didn't have any means of gaining your own food, then you might accept the food you were given and you might eat and appreciate that food. You certainly don't have to eat it, but that if you did, any harm in the making of that food, that is of the person who made it and gave it to you. So the Buddha had and followed this tradition of dana, which says these people are dedicated to their spiritual pursuits. They're not making their own food, so let us support them. And throughout the history of India, people understood that these sorts of people are vegetarian. It's not likely that anybody was giving them meat, but if they went to a new area and meat eating was practiced there, they might offer that. And if they offered that, the monastics were told it's okay that you partake of what you're given. The Buddha said in a very interesting proviso, he said, imagine that there were a mother and father with a child, and they were crossing a long wilderness, a long desert. Midway through, they might run out of food, and they might have to resort to eating their own child. Now, if they did such a thing, would they do this with great relish or with great reluctance? Would they eat their own child to fatten their bodies, to smarten their bodies, to make themselves beautiful, or simply to survive? And with this attitude, should people eat meat if it's an absolute necessity, if there's nothing else to eat, if that's all that's offered to preserve life in a place, and we could imagine far outside of India, though there was no India at the time, actually, because these were separate states, separate kingdoms, and the Buddha was living in Magadha and Bihar. So the attitude was not, oh, it's fine, just do what you like, so long as you didn't kill it. No, if you even suspected that it was killed for you, it's a violation of the rules to eat it. So it's not okay, but people have made of the rule saying, so long as you don't know and you didn't kill it. So if I go to the grocery store and I'm buying what's already slaughtered, I'm not engaged in killing. But I've often argued, that's like saying to the Godfather, did you kill this man? Oh, no, it was my assistant Guido. Oh, okay, well, then you're off the hook. Oh, well, hey, Guido, why did you kill this man? Oh, the boss told me I had to do it, right? So we have the idea that if you go to the butcher and you say, you didn't kill this meat for me, right? Oh, no, I killed it for everybody. I actually killed it for anybody who buys it. So as soon as you purchase it, it was killed for you. So this would be in violation of the rule within Theravada. But of course, nobody thinks like this. People having the desire to eat meat find excuses and find ways around. The Buddha, we don't have any time where it's pointed out that the Buddha was eating meat, because it would be preposterous to offer a holy man that kind of meal. But people do point to one time where the Buddha ate a meal called Pig's Delight. It was his final meal. And Pig's Delight is actually mushrooms, truffles, what pigs delight in eating. He was given these truffles, and he said to the Chunda, the blacksmith, offer them only to me and then bury the rest of it. There is no other digestive system that could handle it. Apparently, the Buddha's digestive system couldn't handle it either. So he consciously ate these mushrooms, but people point to it and say, oh, look at there. The Buddha's having pork chops and applesauce. And it's not true, but with this sort of rationalization, people have made it okay. And the Buddha said something perhaps more important. It's not really about our diet that makes us spiritual or not spiritual. And people frequently ask me, is there any tradition of Native Americans who were vegan, who were even vegetarian? And I say, of course there were vegetarian Native Americans, and there were even vegan Native American vegetarians. For instance, all the shamans, all the medicine women and medicine men would have practiced this. Are you going to tell me that in a large population of people, no one has that natural ahimsa, that natural affinity for compassion, who sees an animal slaughtered and thinks, I want no part of that? Of course that would have happened. And because it's not formally spelled out in written records, people say, oh, no, they were hunters and they were doing this and that. And these images we have, that's what people know, and that's what people believe. And because there aren't written records to go and say, here it happened, here it didn't happen. It's this way, it's that way. There was no word vegan, I imagine. And this is our own definition of what counts as vegan. Will honey count as vegan? Will it not? We dispute it amongst ourselves. But clearly there have always been people with a compassionate ideal, with the compassion, for instance, today. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Seven. No. You are certainly one of those. We need to stop. I'm sorry. We've gone a bit over our time. I hope that you can stay with us today. At the end, we do go into breakout groups, and some lucky people will be in a group with you, and hopefully you can continue sharing some of this beautiful wisdom. Thank you so much.
In Los Angeles, we're celebrating our vegan street fair today, which is a national thing, so it'll come to your area. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.